A judge sentences two innocent black twins to death, without a shred of real evidence, no DNA, no motive. Just a courtroom stacked against them, and a system that's been waiting to swallow them whole. But with seconds left before their execution, they make one final call to their estranged father, who just happens to be the U.S. Attorney General. What he uncovers about the judge, the trial, and a secret society buried deep in the law will shock the entire nation. How far will a father go to save the children he once left behind? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun painted long shadows across Pine Bluff's quiet streets as Naomi and Normani Grant pedaled their bikes through their neighborhood. The familiar scent of magnolia blossoms filled the air, mixing with the smell of fresh bread from Ms. Jenkins's kitchen window. "Race you to the center!" Normani called out, pushing ahead on his blue bicycle. Naomi laughed, her braids bouncing as she caught up. "You know I always win." "That's because you cheat," Normani shot back with a grin. Their playful banter echoed through the streets lined with modest homes, many sporting well-tended gardens and American flags. As they approached the community center, their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. The building's wall bore their mother's last gift to Pine Bluff, a stunning mural depicting children of all colors holding hands beneath a rainbow. The words, "Unity through love," flowed across the top in elegant script. Naomi caught Normani staring at it, his eyes soft with memory. "She'd be proud of us," she said quietly, reaching for his hand. "Stanford and Duke acceptance letters in the same week? Mom would have thrown the biggest party." Normani squeezed her hand. "Yeah, she would have made her famous sweet potato pie." Inside the community center, they quickly got to work. The morning workshop buzzed with energy as neighborhood kids gathered around tables covered in art supplies. Naomi helped a little girl with her science project while Normani showed a group of boys how to build simple circuits. "Remember to register your parents to vote," Naomi called out as she sorted through registration forms. "Every voice matters in Pine Bluff." Across town, behind wrought iron gates and perfectly manicured hedges, Esther Whitlow's estate sparkled with activity. Catering vans lined the circular driveway as staff prepared for the evening's fundraiser. Esther stood in her marble foyer, directing workers with practiced grace. "The security cameras can be turned off at 8, she instructed her head of security. "Our guests value their privacy." Her pearl necklace caught the light as she smiled, every inch the gracious hostess. The gala proceeded exactly as planned. Crystal glasses clinked, string quartet music floated through the air, and Pine Bluff's elite discussed business behind closed doors. None noticed when the cameras went dark. Later that night, chaos erupted. A masked figure moved through the shadows of Esther's estate. Shots rang out. When police arrived, they found a security guard dead and Esther's prized collection of antique jewelry missing, along with a substantial amount of cash. The only lead, grainy footage from a gas station security camera showing a masked person limping away, a distinctive butterfly tattoo visible on their neck. Back in their neighborhood, Naomi and Normani walked their bikes home under a star-filled sky. Their phones buzzed simultaneously, their father's number lighting up the screens. Naomi's jaw tightened. She declined the call without hesitation. "You could at least listen to what he has to say," Normani suggested softly. "What's the point?" Naomi deleted the notification. "He made his choice 5 years ago. We're not his priority anymore." They reached their modest 2-story home, its white paint peeling slightly at the edges. Neither twin noticed the unmarked police cars parked 2 blocks away, or the shadows moving through their neighbors' yards. Dawn broke over Pine Bluff with shocking violence. The twins' bedroom doors burst open simultaneously, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Naomi sat up in bed, heart pounding as multiple officers swarmed her room, weapons drawn. "What's happening?" she screamed, raising her hands. From across the hall, she heard Normani's voice. "We didn't do anything!" Officers roughly pulled them from their beds. Naomi caught glimpses of their neighbors gathering on their porches, faces shocked and confused in the early morning light. Mrs. Washington from next door held her hand over her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. Naomi Grant. Normani Grant, you're under arrest for armed robbery and first-degree murder, an officer recited, snapping handcuffs around Naomi's wrists. This is crazy. Naomi struggled as they led her outside. We need a lawyer. We have rights. She watched helplessly as two officers slammed Normani against a squad car, her brother's face contorted in pain. The sound that tore from her throat was primal, filled with rage and fear. Get off him! Normani. The squad car's door slammed shut on her brother's terrified face, and Naomi's scream echoed through the neighborhood where they'd grown up, where their mother's mural still watched over the community, where their dreams of college and future success had moments ago seemed so certain. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead as Naomi sat on the cold metal bench in her holding cell. Her wrists ached from the tight handcuffs, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Across the corridor, through the steel bars, she could see Normani in an identical cell, his head bowed and shoulders trembling. Normani, she whispered, trying to catch his attention. Stay strong. We'll figure this out. A white deputy passing by slammed his baton against the bars, making both twins jump. Quiet in the cells, he smirked, adjusting his belt. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right, kids? Naomi's throat tightened with anger, but she held her tongue. Years of her mother's warnings echoed in her head. Never give them an excuse, baby. Some people are just waiting for one. The morning crawled by without explanation. Every time they asked to make a phone call, the deputies ignored them or laughed. The holding cells filled and emptied with other detainees, but the twins remained, their confusion turning to fear. Around mid-morning, two detectives entered the jail area. One was tall and lean, with a notebook tucked under his arm. The other was shorter, with a coffee stain on his wrinkled tie. They took Normani first. No, Naomi protested, pressing against the bars. We have the right to a lawyer. Don't say anything, Normani. Her brother's eyes met hers briefly before the detectives led him away. The fear she saw there made her stomach churn. 20 minutes later, they came for her. The interrogation room was small and windowless, with a metal table bolted to the floor. The tall detective introduced himself as Matthews, while his partner Rogers settled into a corner. We have a witness who saw you and your brother leaving the Whitlow estate last night, Matthews said, opening his notebook. Make this easier on yourself, Naomi. Tell us where you hid the jewelry. Naomi's mind flashed back to the previous evening. She and Normani had locked up the community center at 8:10 p.m. She remembered checking her phone to see if their father had left a voicemail. They'd stopped at Mr. Chen's corner store for snacks at 8:30, grape soda for her, orange for Normani. The security cameras would show that. We were nowhere near the Whitlow estate, she said firmly. We want a lawyer. Rogers stepped forward, his coffee breath hot in her face. Lawyers are for guilty people. Are you guilty, Naomi? I know my rights, she insisted, though her voice shook. We didn't do anything wrong. The questioning continued for what felt like hours. They tried to confuse her, to trip her up, but she kept repeating, We want a lawyer. In the community, word of their arrest spread like wildfire. On WBLK, the local black radio station, Pastor Jenkins called it a grave injustice during his morning sermon broadcast. But the white-owned Channel 5 News ran a different story, showing altered photos of the twins that darkened their skin and emphasized features to match gang stereotypes. The caption read, Local teens charged in elite home invasion. By afternoon, a public defender finally arrived. Ms. Darla Ricks looked like she hadn't slept in days, her gray suit wrinkled and her hair escaping its bun. She met with the twins in a cramped consultation room, spreading files across the table with tired hands. Here's the situation, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. They're charging you both with first-degree murder and armed robbery. The evidence is circumstantial, but in Concordia County, that doesn't matter much. But we're innocent, Normani protested. We were at the community center, then the store. There are cameras, Dash. The community center cameras were malfunctioning last night, Ricks cut in, making air quotes. And Mr. Chen's store footage from that time period is mysteriously corrupted. Welcome to Pine Bluff Justice, kids. Naomi felt the room spin. This can't be happening. We have college acceptance letters. We have plans. Don't expect justice here, Rix interrupted, her voice harsh but her eyes sympathetic. This system isn't built for justice. It's built for convictions, and they want yours. The twins sat in stunned silence as Rix outlined their options, all of them bad. She explained the arraignment process, warned them about the judge's reputation, and told them to keep their mouths shut no matter what. Late afternoon brought the arraignment. The twins were marched into the courtroom in bright orange jumpsuits that hung loose on their frames. Their hands and feet were shackled, the chains clicking against the floor with each step. The gallery was packed with familiar faces, community center volunteers, church members, neighbors. But it was the figure seated in the front row that caught Naomi's attention. Esther Whitlow sat perfectly poised in an expensive cream suit, her silver hair styled immaculately. As the twins were led to the defendant's table, she turned to watch them, her lips curved in a calm smile that never reached her eyes. Normani stumbled slightly, his chains catching on the floor. Naomi wanted to reach for him, to steady him like she had done countless times before, but the shackles kept her hands bound at her waist. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and absolutely terrified. The courtroom's wooden benches creaked with movement as everyone rose for the judge's entrance. Naomi kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at Esther's smiling face again. But she could feel the woman's gaze on her, as cold and calculating as the system that had brought them here. Ms. Rix stood beside them, her case files clutched in white-knuckled hands. Despite her earlier bluntness, she positioned herself slightly in front of the twins, as if trying to shield them from what was to come. The gesture, small as it was, gave Naomi a flicker of hope in the midst of her fear. The bailiff's voice rang out in the hushed courtroom. All rise. The Concordia County Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Harrison presiding. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse's tall windows, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. The historic courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and the rustle of newspaper pages. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised over notepads while television cameras waited outside, prohibited from filming inside. Naomi and Normani sat rigid at the defense table, their orange jumpsuits stark against the dark wood paneling. Ms. Rix shuffled through her papers beside them, dark circles under her eyes suggesting another sleepless night. Across the aisle, the prosecution team looked fresh and confident, their suits pressed and files neatly arranged. District Attorney Wilson stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, the state moves to proceed under the Capital Justice Efficiency Act. Given the severity of the charges and the clear public interest, we request an expedited trial schedule. Ms. Rix jumped to her feet. Objection, the defense hasn't had time to properly investigate or prepare. This law was meant for cases with overwhelming evidence, not— The act makes no such distinction, Ms. Rix, D.A. Wilson interrupted smoothly. It simply requires a capital charge and the state's motion for expedition. Both conditions are met. Normani's hands trembled beneath the table. Naomi wanted to reach for him, but the deputies watching them made her hesitate. She'd heard about the Capital Justice Efficiency Act on the news, a law pushed through by conservative judges that cut the usual death penalty timeline from years to months. She never imagined it would apply to them. The main doors opened, and a hush fell over the courtroom. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Quentin Harlan presiding. Judge Harlan moved to the bench with measured steps, his black robe flowing behind him. His face remained perfectly neutral as he took his seat, but his eyes swept the courtroom with careful attention, lingering briefly on the twins. Be seated, he said, his voice carrying easily without seeming to raise it. I've reviewed the morning's motions. Ms. Rix, I understand you wish to suppress Mr. Jennings' witness statement? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rix stood again. The police report shows Mr. Jennings was detained without cause and questioned for hours without Miranda warnings. His statement was clearly coerced. The witness came forward voluntarily, D.A. Wilson cut in. Judge Harlan raised a hand for silence. I've reviewed the circumstances. Motion to suppress is denied. He delivered the ruling with such calm politeness that it took a moment for its impact to register. Call your first witness, Mr. Wilson. Dale Jennings shuffled to the witness stand. his thin frame swimming in an ill-fitting suit. His eyes darted around the courtroom, never settling in one place for long. After being sworn in, he perched on the edge of the witness chair like he might bolt at any moment. "Mr. Jennings," Wilson began, "where were you on the night of April 15th? "I was walking near the Whitlow place," Jennings said, his voice scratchy. "I like walking at night, helps me think." "And what did you see?" "Two dark figures running from the estate." Jennings pointed at the twins. "About their size, their build." Ms. Ricks stood for cross-examination, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Mr. Jennings, you initially told police you saw the figures around 9:30 p.m., correct?" "Objection, Your Honor," Wilson called out. "Counsel is attempting to impeach her own witness." "Sustained," Judge Harlan said smoothly, though Ms. Ricks had done nothing of the sort. She tried a different approach. "What was the lighting like that night, Mr. Jennings?" "Good enough to see, there were lights. But in your statement to police, you said it was too dark to make out any features. Which is it?" "Objection, badgering the witness," Wilson said. "Sustained." Judge Harlan's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Move along, Ms. Ricks." The pattern continued through the cross-examination. Every time Ms. Ricks pointed out a contradiction in Jennings's testimony, an objection would be sustained. When she tried to question his history of drug use, Judge Harlan shut her down completely. The defense's turn came after lunch. Ms. Rollins, the community center director, took the stand. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she testified. "Naomi and Normani were at the center until 8:10 p.m., she stated firmly. "I personally watched them lock up. They've volunteered with us for years, model citizens, both of them." "And you're certain of the time?" Ms. Ricks asked. "Absolutely. I had to log it in our system for insurance purposes. They left heading toward Chen's store like they always do." Her testimony was clear and unwavering, but Naomi noticed Judge Harlan watching Ms. Rollins with an unsettling intensity. When court adjourned for the day, two deputies approached Ms. Rollins in the hallway. "Ma'am, we have a warrant for an unpaid parking ticket from 2019, one said, producing a paper. "That's ridiculous," Ms. Rollins protested. "I've never had a parking ticket in my life." But the deputies led her away anyway, her indignant voice fading down the corridor. Naomi and Normani exchanged frightened glances as they were led back to their holding cells. They both understood what it meant. Anyone who tried to help them would face consequences. The courthouse emptied slowly, people filtering out into the warm evening air. News vans idled at the curb, reporters doing their stand-ups for the evening news. But in a quiet corner of the second floor, two men stood in conversation, their voices low. Charles Finch, his silver hair catching the last sunlight through the window, leaned close to Judge Harlan. "One clean conviction," he murmured. "That's all we need to hold the line." Judge Harlan nodded grimly, his usually pleasant expression replaced by something harder. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air between them. The evening brought a heavy silence to the county jail, broken only by the distant sound of doors clanging and guards' boots on concrete. In their separate cells across the narrow hallway, Naomi and Normani lay on their thin mattresses, close enough to whisper but too far to touch. The harsh overhead lights had dimmed for the night, casting long shadows across the cold floor between them. "Remember how Mom used to make us hot chocolate after school?" Normani's voice was soft, barely carrying across the space between them. "With those tiny marshmallows she'd hide in the back of the pantry? She'd always put extra in mine because she knew they were my favorite." Naomi rolled onto her side, facing her brother's cell. The metal frame of her cot creaked beneath her weight. "And she'd pretend she couldn't find them just to make us laugh." The memory brought both warmth and pain, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Remember her workshop songs? The ones she made up while painting those big canvases? Normani hummed softly, a gentle melody their mother had sung while painting. The familiar tune floated between their cells, bouncing off the concrete walls, and for a moment, they could almost smell the paint and hear their mother's voice joining in. They could almost feel the warmth of their childhood home, so different from this cold, sterile place. The song faded. leaving the siblings in silence again. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, her usual composure cracking like thin ice. "I want Dad," she whispered, the words catching in her throat like thorns. "I know he left us, but I want our dad. I want him to fix this like he promised he'd always fix everything." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with years of hurt and abandonment. Normani didn't respond immediately, but his breathing changed, becoming more ragged as he fought back his own tears. The sound echoed in the quiet corridor. The scene shifted, memories pulling Naomi back 5 years. She stood in a crowd outside the courthouse, 14 years old, and trying to be brave despite the hole in her heart. Camera flashes popped like lightning as her father approached the microphones. Isaiah Grant cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his voice steady despite the circumstances. His hands didn't tremble like hers did. "My wife was an innocent woman," he declared to the forest of microphones, his voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "A devoted mother, a talented artist, and a pillar of our community. She was gunned down while reaching for her ID as instructed by the officer." He paused, his jaw tightening, a muscle working in his cheek. "Justice will be served. I promise you that." But it wasn't. Naomi watched her father slip into a sleek black car moments later, choosing his political career over a public fight for her mother. The last glimpse she had of him that day was his silhouette through the tinted windows as the car pulled away, leaving her and Normani standing alone on the courthouse steps with relatives they barely knew. Back in the present, harsh fluorescent lights flickered in the jail's interview room, casting an unhealthy pallor over everyone's skin. Ms. Ricks spread photos across the metal table, her face drawn with exhaustion and frustration. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her suit looked like she'd slept in it. The court-appointed investigator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a receding hairline, stood nearby with a smug expression that made Naomi's stomach turn. "This photo clearly shows Ms. Grant wearing a jacket matching the description from the CCTV footage," he said, tapping one image with his manicured fingernail. "The pattern is distinctive." Naomi stared at the photograph, her heart sinking. It showed her at a protest 2 years ago, wearing a black windbreaker with white stripes on the sleeves. The image was crisp and clear, nothing like the grainy gas station footage that had been shown in court. She remembered that day. They were protesting budget cuts to after-school programs. "This is ridiculous," Ms. Ricks snapped, slamming her palm on the table. "That jacket is a common style. The photo is 2 years old, and the CCTV footage is so blurry you can barely make out a person, let alone clothing details. Half the teenagers in this county own similar jackets." The investigator shrugged, his shoulders rising and falling with casual indifference. "The similarity is striking enough to be entered into evidence. The prosecution finds it compelling." "You can't be serious," Ms. Ricks argued, her voice rising. "This wouldn't hold up in any fair court. It's circumstantial at best, prejudicial at worst. Judge Harlan has already approved it." His tone suggested the matter was closed. After the investigator left, Ms. Ricks slumped in her chair, running her hands through her graying hair. She looked 10 years older than when the meeting began. "Listen to me, both of you," she said quietly, leaning forward. "They want a story. They need someone to blame, someone to make an example of. You're it." She met their eyes in turn, her gaze intense and sorrowful. "They're not looking for truth. They're looking for a conviction, and they'll twist whatever they need to get it." Later that evening, heavy boots echoed down the corridor like approaching thunder. 2 guards appeared, their faces impassive as stone, keys jangling at their belts. "Grant siblings," one announced, his voice flat and emotionless. "You're being transferred to Death Watch block. Precautionary measure." Naomi's blood ran cold, her fingers going numb. Death Watch was for inmates in their final days before execution. Moving them there now, before the trial was even complete, sent a clear message about their intended fate. This wasn't justice. It was a foregone conclusion. The siblings were led out in shackles, the metal biting into their wrists and ankles, their orange jumpsuits bright under the harsh lights like warning signs. The transport van waited in the loading bay, its engine idling in the cool night air, exhaust creating ghostly clouds in the darkness. Before they could be loaded inside, Naomi spoke up, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I need to make one phone call. Just one." The deputies exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Seconds stretched into minutes as they considered her request, the only sound the rumble of the van's engine and the distant slam of doors. Finally, one of them pulled out a cell phone and held it out to her cuffed hands. "Make it quick," he muttered. With trembling fingers, Naomi dialed the number she'd memorized years ago, but never used. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Her heart pounded with each ring, a desperate drumbeat of hope and fear. Then, a click. "Dad." Her voice cracked, the single word carrying years of pain and need. "It's me. They're going to kill us." The fluorescent lights of the Department of Justice press room cast harsh shadows across Isaiah Grant's face as he concluded his remarks on international cybercrime. His voice carried the practiced authority of a seasoned federal official, steady and measured. "Thank you for your attention. We'll take no further questions at this time." Isaiah gathered his papers, nodding to the assembled reporters with practiced politeness. As the press corps filed out, his assistant Marcus approached with quick steps, a yellow sticky note held between his fingers. "Sir, this came in during the briefing." He handed the note to Isaiah, who read it with tired eyes that suddenly widened. "Voicemail from Naomi Grant. Urgent." Isaiah's hand trembled slightly as he held the paper. The carefully constructed walls of his professional demeanor cracked, revealing a flash of raw emotion. 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days since he'd last heard from either of his children. Not that he was counting. "Clear my schedule for the next hour," he managed to say, his throat tight. Marcus nodded and retreated, leaving Isaiah alone in the now empty press room. In his private office, Isaiah sat heavily in his leather chair, staring at his phone. The voicemail notification blinked accusingly. With a deep breath, he pressed play and held the phone to his ear. "Dad." Naomi's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear he'd never heard from his strong-willed daughter. "It's me. They're going to kill us." The words hit him like physical blows. His chest tightened as memories flooded back. Another phone call, 5 years earlier, that had changed everything. The scene shifted in his mind to that terrible day. He sat in this same office, younger but already carrying the weight of ambition and compromise. The police report about his wife's shooting lay open on his desk, damning in its details. The officer's body camera footage, the trajectory analysis, the witness statements, all of it pointed to an unjustified shooting. But the police union representative had been clear. Push this and every law enforcement organization in the country would oppose his judicial reform bill. Years of work, relationships built, promises made, all would crumble. With shaking hands, he'd signed the order to seal the investigation, telling himself it was for the greater good. He could do more good from a position of power than as a martyr to a lost cause. The cost of that decision played out in his children's faces. He saw their shock, their disbelief, their growing understanding that their father had chosen political expedience over justice for their mother. They never said it directly, they didn't have to. Their silence said everything. Isaiah snapped back to the present, already dialing the Pine Bluff courthouse. A receptionist answered with practiced cheerfulness. "This is Isaiah Grant, Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I need to speak with Judge Harlan immediately regarding case number ... He glanced at his computer screen where he'd pulled up the court records. 47 CR 2023. "I'm sorry, sir." The receptionist's tone cooled notably. Under the state sovereignty mandate, federal officials are prohibited from interfering in state capital cases without explicit invitation from the governor. This isn't interference, these are my children. "I understand, sir, but the law is clear. Good day." The line went dead. Isaiah stared at the phone, then pressed his intercom. "Marcus, get me Governor Wheeler's office." 3 calls and 4 transfers later, a smooth voice informed him that the governor was unavailable and would remain so for the foreseeable future. His chief of staff, Patricia Chen, appeared in his doorway. "Sir, whatever you're thinking, don't. This could end everything we've worked for." Isaiah was already pulling on his coat. "Charter the DOJ jet now." "Sir, please." Patricia stepped into the office, closing the door. "I know these are your children, but you can't just—" "They're going to kill my children, Patricia." His voice cracked. "Everything else? None of it matters. The state sovereignty mandate? To hell with the mandate." Isaiah grabbed his briefcase. "Either help me or get out of my way." 2 hours later, the small DOJ jet touched down at Pine Bluff's modest airstrip. The sun was setting, painting the Carolina sky in shades of orange and purple. As Isaiah descended the stairs, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. The sheriff stepped out, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. He was a tall man with hard eyes and a practiced sneer. "Mr. Grant," he said, emphasizing the civilian address. "You're not welcome here, sir. Federal authority stops at the state line." Isaiah didn't break stride as he walked past the sheriff, his voice carrying the weight of both father and federal prosecutor. "Then it's a good thing I'm not here as a federal official." He continued walking toward the terminal, his footsteps firm and determined on the cracked tarmac. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite steps of Pine Bluff Courthouse as Isaiah Grant stood before the entrance, his DOJ credentials displayed in one hand and his worn leather briefcase in the other. 2 court officers blocked his path, their faces set in expressions of practiced indifference. "Like we said, sir, the courtroom's sealed by judicial order. No visitors, no exceptions," the taller officer stated, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Isaiah kept his voice steady, though his jaw tightened. "I'm not a visitor. I'm their father and a federal official." "State sovereignty, sir, you know the law." The second officer shifted his weight, deliberately placing himself more squarely in front of the door. Behind Isaiah, a small crowd began to gather. He heard whispers of recognition ripple through the predominantly black onlookers. That's Isaiah Grant. The twins' daddy finally showed up. The whispers carried equal measures of hope and accusation. Isaiah felt their weight on his shoulders, along with the memories of another time he'd stood before cameras at these same steps, choosing political pragmatism over justice for his wife. A news van screeched to a halt at the curb, and reporters spilled out like ants from a disturbed hill. Microphones thrust forward as cameras started rolling. "Mr. Grant, why are you just now getting involved in your daughter's case?" "Deputy AG Grant, is this an official DOJ intervention?" "Sir, do you believe your children are innocent?" Isaiah turned away from the barrage of questions, his eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted a woman hurrying up the side steps, her arms full of manila folders. Her practical pantsuit and harried expression marked her as a public defender. "Ms. Ricks," he called out, remembering the name from the court documents. She paused, regarding him with tired eyes. "Mr. Grant, took you long enough?" She jerked her head toward a coffee cart parked near the courthouse lawn. "Walk with me." They found a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree, away from the growing crowd of protesters and media. Darla Ricks pulled a thick file from her stack and handed it to Isaiah. "Your daughters are being railroaded," she said bluntly, taking a sip of bitter courthouse coffee. "Judge Harlan's running this like a theatrical production. Everything has to look perfect, procedurally spotless. But it's all fabricated perfection." Isaiah flipped through the pages, his prosecutor's eye catching inconsistencies. The timeline doesn't add up. And this witness statement? "Dale Jennings," Ricks cut in. "Local junkie who'd say the moon was made of cheese if you gave him enough meth. He's our only witness, and his story changes every time he tells it. But Harlan won't let me cross-examine properly." "What about the CCTV footage?" "Conveniently corrupted. All we have is one blurry still from a gas station showing someone in a jacket similar to one Naomi owned 2 years ago." Ricks's laugh was hollow. "It's a black hoodie, Mr. Grant. Half the county owns one." Isaiah pulled out his laptop, typing rapidly. "I'm filing an emergency injunction with the Federal Circuit Court. The execution order violates due process." "Already tried." Ricks shook her head. They'll reject it in under 2 hours. State sovereignty mandate gives them cover. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Something bigger is happening here. Harlan's too invested. This isn't just about a robbery gone wrong. Isaiah spread the case files across the concrete bench, his legal training taking over. The inconsistencies jumped out like neon signs. Police statements dated before the crime occurred. Witness interviews with missing timestamp data. Evidence logs that didn't match property receipts. The witness list, he muttered, pulling out a single sheet. In a capital case, there should be dozens of names. Character witnesses, experts, responding officers. He held up the paper. We have one name, Dale Jennings. Now you're seeing it, Rick said quietly. The whole thing's manufactured, but proving it. She glanced over her shoulder. Watch yourself, Mr. Grant. This isn't D.C. Rules are different here. That evening, driving back to his hotel in a rental car, Isaiah noticed the black SUV. It stayed 3 cars behind, matching his turns with professional precision. He took a deliberately wrong turn, then another. The SUV followed. At the hotel, the desk clerk stopped him. Everything all right with your room, sir? Maintenance was called up there about an hour ago. Isaiah hadn't called maintenance. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, pushing open his floor's door carefully. The hall was empty, but his room door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked untouched, but he'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize a professional search. The message was clear: back off. But they didn't know Isaiah Grant. Not really. They knew the politician, the compromiser, the man who'd chosen career over conscience once before. But they didn't know the father who'd spent sleepless nights memorizing constitutional law, who'd earned his reputation as a legal prodigy, long before he became a political player. As midnight approached, Isaiah sat alone on the courthouse steps, a flashlight between his teeth as he pored over scanned copies of Carolina's original state constitution. Around him, the last protesters had drifted away, leaving only the occasional police cruiser passing by, its occupants watching him with suspicious eyes. Page after page, amendment after amendment, he searched for anything: a procedural requirement, a jurisdictional clause, an overlooked protection that might save his daughters. His fingers traced the faded text as if he could absorb its secrets through touch alone. The old granite steps were cold and hard beneath him, but Isaiah barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the cone of his flashlight beam, and the desperate hope that somewhere in these yellowed pages lay salvation for Naomi and Normani. The ancient brass door handle of the Pine Bluff Historical Society creaked as Isaiah turned it, stepping into a dimly lit foyer that smelled of old books and furniture polish. The building had once been a plantation manor, its walls now lined with carefully preserved documents instead of portraits of slave owners. Been wondering when you'd show up here, a gravelly voice called from behind a mahogany desk. Mr. Booker, the night archivist, peered at Isaiah over wire-rimmed glasses. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who'd seen too much history repeat itself. You knew I was coming? Isaiah asked, his briefcase heavy with futile legal motions. Your daddy used to come here too back in '65. Same look in his eyes, like a man searching for justice in a place that buries it deep. Booker stood slowly, his joints protesting. Follow me. They walked through narrow corridors lined with filing cabinets and glass display cases. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, stirring dust motes that danced in the dim light of aging fluorescent tubes. Your girls, Booker said quietly. They volunteer at the community center, help the little ones with reading, just like their mama did. He glanced back at Isaiah. Shame you weren't around to see it. The words stung, but Isaiah couldn't argue. He'd chosen his battles poorly over the years, always telling himself the next fight would be the one where he'd take a stand. Booker led him to a secured room at the back of the building. The brass nameplate read, Restricted Archives, Staff Only. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather-bound volumes and acid-free boxes. They buried more than bones in this town, Booker said, running his fingers along spines until he found what he wanted. He pulled out a massive leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. 1837 Legal Codex, Back when some white folks still had a conscience about what was happening. Isaiah took the heavy volume, careful with its fragile binding. What am I looking for? Judge Silas Wren. Booker's voice dropped lower. He wrote things into law they didn't want written, things they tried to bury so deep, most folks forgot they existed. He pointed to a reading desk beneath a green-shaded lamp. Take your time, I'll keep watch. For hours, Isaiah pored over the ancient legal text. His eyes burned from strain, but he couldn't stop. The language was dense, filled with archaic legal terms and references to long-forgotten statutes. Then, near midnight, he found it. Retroactive judicial inversion, he whispered, tracing the words with his finger. The clause, written in Judge Wren's precise handwriting, laid out a legal mechanism that seemed almost too perfect. Capital convictions could be reversed retroactively if proved racially biased. Isaiah's heart raced as he read the requirements. The petitioner had to present the case in open court with 3 seated judges present, including one from the original sentencing circuit. It was a brilliant legal construction designed to prevent any single judge from blocking justice through procedural tricks. Mr. Booker, he called out softly. What happened to Judge Wren? The old archivist shuffled back in carrying a manila folder. Thought you might ask. He spread newspaper clippings across the desk. Disappeared in 1838. They found his horse by the river but never found him. The yellowed articles told a chilling story. Weeks before his disappearance, Wren had attempted to use his own clause to exonerate a black man convicted of murder. The evidence of racial bias was clear, but before the hearing could take place, Wren vanished. Some say he was killed, Booker said quietly. Others say he escaped north. But his clause remained in the books, forgotten but never repealed. Isaiah sat back, his mind racing. He had what he needed, legal standing to challenge the twins' conviction. But the requirements were daunting. He needed 3 judges in open court, including Harlan himself. With the courthouse sealed and the media circus growing outside, getting even one judge to hear the petition seemed impossible. They'll fight this, Booker warned. Might come after you like they did Wren. Let them, Isaiah replied, his voice hard. He'd spent too many years compromising, choosing the safe path. Not this time. He pulled out his phone and took careful photographs of the relevant pages, making sure every word was legible. His hands shook slightly as he composed a fax to Janet Chen, his most trusted deputy in Washington. She'd know how to authenticate the clause and prepare the legal groundwork. Then Isaiah opened his laptop and began to type. The words flowed easily now, fueled by decades of suppressed anger and regret. They're killing my children because they're black. The op-ed poured out of him. The story of Naomi and Normani's arrest, the fabricated evidence, the rushed trial, and now the discovery of Judge Wren's forgotten clause. He wrote about justice buried but not dead, about a father's failure to protect his family, and about a system designed to maintain power through fear. He attached the piece to 3 separate emails addressed to major national newspapers. His finger hovered over the send button as doubt crept in. This would end his career. The political fallout would be nuclear. Then he remembered Naomi's voice on the phone. They're going to kill us. Isaiah hit send. Your daddy would be proud, Booker said softly, gathering up the old newspapers. He always said you had more fight in you than you showed. I should have shown it sooner, Isaiah replied, carefully closing the ancient codex. Thank you, Mr. Booker, for everything. Just make it count this time, the old man said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Make it count. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pine Bluff courthouse lawn as crowds gathered in growing numbers. What had started as a small group of local protesters had swelled into hundreds, their signs bobbing like waves in an angry sea. Free the Grant twins and justice for Naomi and Normani dominated the makeshift forest of cardboard and wood. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical trees. Reporters stood before cameras, gesturing at the historic courthouse behind them as they delivered their morning updates. The CNN correspondent's voice carried over the crowd. Isaiah Grant's explosive op-ed has sparked nationwide attention. The morning air crackled with energy as more protesters arrived by the minute. Many wore t-shirts with the twins' faces printed on them, while others carried enlarged photos of Naomi and Normani volunteering at the community center. The contrast between these images and the doctored mugshots shown on local news was stark and deliberate. Isaiah watched from his rental car parked in an alley across the street. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the op-ed went live. Calls from major networks, civil rights organizations, and old colleagues poured in. He'd ignored them all except one, a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Marcus's Diner, back booth. LC double quote." The diner sat on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering weakly in the morning light. Isaiah entered through the back door as instructed, finding Detective Lana Cross already seated in the corner booth, her badge tucked discreetly inside her jacket. Her expression was guarded but determined. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said as Isaiah slid into the booth. "Probably both." "I'm running out of options," Isaiah replied, his voice low. "And time." Lana glanced around before sliding a manila envelope across the table. "What I'm about to tell you, what's in here, it goes deeper than you know. The Concordia Order isn't just some good old boys club. They're organized, powerful." Isaiah opened the envelope carefully. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be financial records. His eyes widened as he began to understand. "Judge Harlan's family has been part of it for generations," Lana continued. "They call themselves guardians of tradition. But it's more than that. They've built a network across the South, judges, politicians, business leaders, all working together to maintain what they call order." Isaiah studied a photograph of Judge Harlan at what appeared to be a private ceremony, wearing an ornate ring with a distinctive symbol. "And Esther Whitlow?" "She's their banker," Lana said, her voice bitter. "Funds everything through a maze of shell companies and foundations. Private prisons, judicial training programs, lobbying firms, all designed to keep the system working in their favor." The waitress approached and they fell silent until she passed. Isaiah's coffee sat untouched, growing cold. "My father was convicted in '92, Lana said quietly. "A Concordia judge. Same pattern, rushed trial, manufactured evidence. He died in prison last year." Isaiah met her eyes, seeing the same pain he felt reflected there. "Why help me now?" "Because they're getting bolder. The twins' case, it's not just about punishment, it's a message. They're showing what happens when people start questioning the order of things." Back at the prison, Naomi and Normani sat in their new cells in the execution wing. The fluorescent lights never turned off here, creating an endless, artificial day. They'd been given paper and pencils, a courtesy for death row inmates to write their goodbyes. Normani's hand shook as he wrote to their old basketball coach. Naomi stared at her blank page, unable to find words that didn't taste like surrender. Through the small window in her cell door, she could see guards passing more frequently than usual, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown even larger. MSNBC's Joy Reid was broadcasting live, discussing the historical context of expedited executions in the South. Protesters had begun singing civil rights hymns, their voices carrying across the lawn and through the courthouse's thick walls. Isaiah parked his car and walked toward the crowd, Lana's envelope secure in his briefcase. People recognized him from the morning shows, parting to create a path to the courthouse steps. He climbed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the top, he turned to face the sea of faces. Cameras swung toward him, red lights blinking. The singing died down as people realized he was about to speak. Isaiah reached into his briefcase and pulled out the weathered document, Judge Wren's Forgotten Clause. His voice when it came was strong and clear, amplified by the protesters' portable speakers. "My name is Isaiah Grant. I'm a father who failed his children once before. I won't fail them again." He held up the document, letting the cameras focus on its aged pages. "This is Clause 19B of the 1837 Carolina State Legal Codex. It provides for the immediate review of any capital conviction where racial bias can be proved. It requires 3 seated judges in open court, including the original sentencing judge. The crowd murmured as understanding spread. Isaiah continued, his voice rising. You talk about state sovereignty? Let's talk about it. Right here, right now, on the record. The courthouse doors remained closed behind him, but he could feel movement inside. Judge Harlan would be watching. Esther Whitlow would be calculating. The order would be scrambling. I'm invoking Clause 19B, Isaiah shouted, his words echoing across the lawn. In front of these witnesses, these cameras, and God himself. You want to talk about law and order? Let's talk about the laws you buried, the order you perverted. The crowd erupted, phones recording every word. National correspondents were already broadcasting live, their voices urgent as they reported this unexpected development. Behind the courthouse's heavy doors, phones began to ring. Isaiah stood firm on the steps, the morning sun at his back, holding the document that might save his children's lives. The crowd's chants changed, becoming more focused. Invoke 19B. Invoke 19B. The midday sun beat down on the courthouse steps as Isaiah Grant stood behind a hastily assembled podium. News cameras formed a half-circle around him, their red recording lights blinking steadily like watchful eyes. The crowd that had been chanting fell silent, hanging on his every word as he carefully unfolded the aged document, the air thick with anticipation and hope. Isaiah's hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the yellowed pages, the weight of history pressing against his fingertips. Microphones captured the soft rustle of the ancient paper, amplifying the sound across the hushed gathering. He cleared his throat and began reading, his voice carrying clearly across the courthouse plaza, strong despite the emotion threatening to crack it. From the Carolina State Legal Codex of 1837, Clause 19B, as written by Judge Silas Wren, Isaiah began, each word deliberate and measured. This court shall be compelled to retroactive review in all cases where evidence suggests conviction was driven by racial disproportionality in sentencing. His finger traced each word as he read, ensuring perfect accuracy, feeling the power of these forgotten words come alive after nearly 2 centuries of neglect. The courthouse doors suddenly swung open with a dramatic creak that echoed across the plaza. A cluster of clerks and legal assistants emerged, phones pressed to their ears, faces flushed with urgency. They huddled near the entrance, speaking in urgent whispers, occasionally glancing nervously at the growing crowd. Inside, through the open doors, more commotion was visible as staff members hurried through the marble halls, papers clutched in white-knuckled hands. Judge Harlan appeared at his chamber window, his normally composed face showing clear distress, the carefully maintained mask of judicial impartiality slipping away. He yanked a phone from his desk, jabbing at the buttons while gesturing sharply with his free hand, his mouth forming words that seemed more like commands than conversation. Even through the thick glass, his agitation was evident to the crowds below, who pointed and whispered at this unusual display. Within an hour, official notice arrived. Judge Harlan had been formally subpoenaed under state law to preside over the Clause 19B hearing. The document was delivered by a young clerk whose freckled face betrayed both terror and excitement, his hands shaking slightly as he carried the official papers across the courthouse lobby. He looked both terrified and thrilled to be part of such a historic moment, his eyes wide with the understanding that he was witnessing something that would be written about in textbooks. Your Honor must either comply with the hearing requirement or formally recuse himself, the clerk announced, reading from the official notice, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. Recusal would constitute admission of bias in the original proceedings. Judge Harlan stood in his doorway, jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek as he accepted the paper with stiff fingers. His carefully maintained veneer of calm cracked slightly as he realized the trap he was in, caught between 2 impossible choices. To refuse would confirm everything Isaiah alleged, laying bare his prejudices for all to see. To comply meant facing public scrutiny of his connection to the Concordia Order, risking everything he'd built over decades. By early afternoon, the judicial quorum was taking shape, each arrival adding to the tension in the air. Judge Mallory arrived first, her dark skin gleaming in the sunlight as she strode purposefully through the crowd, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. A moderate known for her careful adherence to constitutional law, she nodded briefly to the protesters as she entered the courthouse, her expression giving nothing away but her eyes taking in everything. Judge Kenrick followed soon after, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the media attention, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. His reputation as a reluctant moderate preceded him, a man who preferred the quiet of chambers to the chaos of public controversy. He kept his eyes down, clutching his briefcase like a shield as he hurried up the steps, nearly stumbling in his haste to escape the shouted questions. The state's Attorney General, Maxwell Porter, arrived in a black SUV with tinted windows that reflected the faces of the crowd like a dark mirror. He emerged wearing a sharp suit and a thunderous expression, his silver hair catching the sunlight. Porter was a known Concordia ally, and his attempts to block the hearing began immediately, his voice booming across the courthouse steps. "This is procedurally irregular," Porter announced to the assembled press, his hands chopping the air for emphasis. "Modern legislation clearly outlines the appeals process for capital cases. We cannot allow 100-year-old clauses to override current law. This is nothing but a desperate last-minute stunt." But Porter's arguments fell flat against the historical supremacy of constitutional clauses, his words dissolving like sugar in rain. The state's own legal scholars, hastily consulted over emergency conference calls, confirmed that founding documents held precedence over subsequent legislation. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. the following morning, the time written in bold letters on the official notice posted on the courthouse door. Inside the prison, the atmosphere grew tenser by the hour, hope and dread battling in every cell and corridor. The warden received a sealed envelope bearing the distinctive Concordia seal, delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet his eyes. Inside was a simple directive: prepare the chair as scheduled. The message was clear. The order expected the hearing to fail and the executions to proceed without interruption. Guards delivered fresh paper and pencils to Naomi and Normani's cells. The items passed through the bars with uncommon gentleness. "Final statements," one guard explained gruffly, avoiding eye contact as if ashamed. "Required procedure." Naomi sat on her narrow bunk, pencil hovering over the blank page, words failing her for perhaps the first time in her life. How could anyone summarize their life knowing it might end tomorrow? What comfort could she offer to those she'd leave behind? Across the hall, she could hear Normani's pencil scratching steadily against paper, interrupted occasionally by quiet sniffles that broke her heart anew with each one. As evening approached, Isaiah found himself walking through the old graveyard behind the courthouse, drawn there by some instinct he couldn't name. The setting sun cast long shadows between the weathered headstones, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Spanish moss hung like gray curtains from ancient oak trees, swaying gently in the warm breeze, whispering secrets of the past. His feet carried him deeper into the cemetery, past crumbling monuments and tilting markers, some so old the names had been worn away by centuries of rain and wind. Something drew him toward the back corner, where the oldest graves lay half-hidden in tall grass, forgotten by all but the most dedicated historians. There, partially obscured by decades of neglect, he found it, the final resting place of Judge Silas Wren. The tombstone was cracked down the middle, as if struck by lightning or deliberately vandalized, a jagged line splitting the marker like a wound that wouldn't heal. Isaiah knelt in the grass, brushing away moss and dirt with gentle fingers to reveal the inscription. The words emerged slowly. "Justice delayed is justice denied," a final statement from a man who had tried to change history. He traced the letters with his finger, feeling the weight of history beneath his touch, a connection spanning generations. Here lay the man who had written Clause 19b, who had tried to build fairness into an unfair system, who had disappeared mysteriously after attempting to save another black man's life using the very same clause, his body found weeks later under circumstances never fully explained. Isaiah remained kneeling before the grave as darkness settled over the cemetery, stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky above. Tomorrow would determine whether Wren's long-delayed justice would finally be served, or if history would repeat itself in yet another generation, another tragedy in an unbroken chain of injustice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pine Bluff courthouse steps as tension filled the air. By 8:45 a.m., the historic building had become the epicenter of a brewing storm. Armed militia members, their faces set in grim determination, formed a tight perimeter around the courthouse. Some wore patches bearing the distinctive Concordia insignia, a scales of justice wrapped in thorny vines. Protesters pressed against makeshift barriers, their chants echoing off the courthouse's marble facade. "No more lies. Open your eyes." The rhythm of their voices carried across the square, mixing with the mechanical whir of news cameras and the steady thrum of helicopter blades overhead. National media trucks lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers seeking the sun. Reporters stood before their cameras, speaking rapidly into microphones as they gestured to the growing crowd behind them. Inside the courthouse, the air felt thick with anticipation. The gallery was packed, with observers squeezed shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches. Isaiah Grant stood at the defense table, his dark suit crisp despite the humid morning. He arranged his documents with careful precision, each motion deliberate and controlled. When Isaiah rose to present his opening argument, the room fell silent. His voice, steady and clear, filled the courtroom. "Your Honors, what we have before us is not merely a case of wrongful conviction. It is a systematic pattern of judicial manipulation that has plagued Pine Bluff for generations." He moved from behind the table, approaching the bench with a stack of manila folders. These files document 17 cases over the past 30 years where evidence was suppressed, witnesses were intimidated, and jury selection was manipulated to ensure conviction of black defendants. Isaiah laid out each case methodically, drawing clear parallels to his children's situation. He pointed to altered timestamps on police reports, missing witness statements, and suspicious patterns in jury selection. "In my children's case, not a single black juror was seated despite Pine Bluff's demographic makeup being 60% African American." Judge Mallory leaned forward, her eyes sharp as she focused on Judge Harlan. "I have a question about the CCTV footage from the gas station," she said, her tone measured but firm. "Why was this evidence not admitted during the initial trial?" Harlan shifted in his seat, his usual composure showing tiny cracks. "The footage was reviewed and found to be inconclusive," he replied, his words clipped and precise. "Inconclusive?" Judge Mallory pressed. "The defense was not even allowed to view this footage. How was that determination made?" Before Harlan could respond, Isaiah called Dale Jennings to the stand. The key witness shuffled forward, his thin frame swimming in an oversized suit. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights, and his hands trembled as he took the oath. Under Isaiah's questioning, Jennings began to unravel. His earlier testimony about seeing two dark figures became increasingly contradictory. His voice cracked as Isaiah pressed him about his recent release from jail. "Did anyone offer you anything in exchange for your testimony?" Isaiah asked, standing directly before him. Jennings glanced nervously at Judge Harlan, then at the floor. "The sheriff," he mumbled, barely audible. "He gave me $500 and said he'd help fix my parole situation." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Mallory struck her gavel once, restoring order. Meanwhile, in the death row wing of Pine Bluff Prison, Normani Grant paced his tiny cell. 3 days without sleep had left him disconnected from reality. The concrete walls seemed to pulse and shift, and shadows danced in the corners of his vision. In his mind, he was back in the moment of his mother's death. The sound of gunshots echoed in his ears, mixing with the present-day clang of prison doors. "Mom?" he whispered to the empty cell. "Mom? I can't breathe." Across the hall, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bunk, her back straight, eyes focused. She had heard Normani's whispers, his confused mumbling, but forced herself to remain clear-headed. If their father's legal strategy failed, she would need to step up. She began mentally rehearsing arguments, preparing herself to fight for both their lives. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere grew even tenser as Judge Harlan was called to the stand. For the first time since the trial began, he appeared genuinely unsettled. The man who had presided over countless cases with iron control now found himself on the other side of authority. Isaiah approached the witness stand holding a document bearing the Concordia seal. "Judge Harlan, are you familiar with an organization known as the Concordia Order?" Harlan's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the witness stand. "I decline to answer that question." "Your Honor," Isaiah turned to Judge Kenrick, "I move that the witness be compelled to answer." Judge Kenrick, who had been relatively quiet throughout the proceedings, straightened in his chair. "Judge Harlan, you will answer the question," he ordered, his voice firm. Harlan's jaw clenched. After a long moment, he spoke. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The gallery burst into chaos. Reporters rushed from the courtroom to break the news. Outside, the chants grew louder as word spread of Harlan's refusal to testify. The armed militia members tightened their grip on their weapons, tension radiating through their ranks. The evening air hung heavy with humidity as Isaiah walked the perimeter of the courthouse. His footsteps echoed against the weathered brick walls, mind racing with the day's revelations. Security lights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and crickets chirped in the gathering dusk. A sudden movement caught his attention. A woman emerged from behind a large oak tree, her movements quick and furtive. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly as she approached him, her hand clutching something small. "Mr. Grant," she whispered, her voice trembling. Without further explanation, she pressed a flash drive into his palm. Her eyes darted nervously between his face and the surrounding shadows. "Tell them Lana Cross sent it. And hurry." Before Isaiah could respond, she melted back into the crowd of lingering protesters and media personnel, leaving him standing alone with the drive burning questions into his palm. Isaiah made his way to his hotel room, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't followed. The room, though basic, had been swept for surveillance devices earlier that day. He pulled out his secure laptop, a habit from his DOJ days, and inserted the drive with cautious fingers. The screen flickered to life with video footage. Isaiah leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the timestamp. 8:47 p.m., the night of the robbery. The gas station's camera angle showed a figure running past, their movements captured in greater clarity than the official evidence had suggested. Isaiah clicked to enhance the footage, his breath catching as details emerged. The person moved with a distinctive limp favoring their right leg. Their actions, grabbing at a fence, steadying themselves against a wall, all displayed clear left-hand dominance. But it was the flash of ink on their neck that made Isaiah pause the footage. There, clearly visible when the figure turned their head, a butterfly tattoo, its wings spread across pale skin. Isaiah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up public records. Hospital visits, court appearances, police reports. He searched them all with practiced efficiency. A document from New Hope Rehabilitation Center caught his eye. The sign-in sheet showed a name he recognized. Delilah Harlan, checked out 48 hours before the robbery. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Meet me." Back lot of Denny's. 15 minutes. Litchen, get quart. Get quart, 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 get quart. The Denny's parking lot was nearly empty when Isaiah arrived. Detective Lana Cross stood in the shadows near a dumpster, her police badge glinting dully in the security lights. "The butterfly tattoo," she said without preamble. "Delilah got it when she was 16. It's documented in her juvenile record, along with a knee injury from a car accident last year." She never fully recovered. Isaiah processed this information, connecting the dots. But there's no mention of her in the robbery investigation. Because her father buried it, Lana explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. Judge Harlan uses a judicial alias system for certain cases, mostly involving wealthy white defendants with connections. Delilah's files are sealed under Jane Harrison. I've been tracking these cases for years, waiting for the right moment. A car turned into the lot, its headlights sweeping across them. Both tensed until it passed. "Why are you helping us?" Isaiah asked quietly. Lana's eyes hardened. "Because 20 years ago, my father was falsely convicted in Harlan's courtroom. He died in prison while I was still in the academy. Some debts need to be paid." Isaiah's phone buzzed again. Another text from Lana's team. "Don't start your car. Bomb confirmed." His rental car sat innocently in the parking lot, hiding its lethal cargo. Lana was already moving, speaking rapidly into her radio. Within minutes, her colleagues had disabled the ignition system, preventing the detonator from activating. "Concordia's getting desperate," Lana said, watching the bomb squad work from a safe distance. "They know we're close. Whatever you're planning to do with this evidence, do it fast." Isaiah spent the rest of the night in a secure location preparing his presentation. He organized the enhanced footage, cross-referenced it with Delilah's sealed records, and documented the pattern of judicial interference. Each piece of evidence was carefully backed up and distributed to trusted contacts, insurance against any further attempts to silence the truth. As the first hints of dawn colored the sky, Isaiah walked toward the courthouse with a thick manila envelope containing printouts of the footage and Delilah's sealed record. The morning air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms from the courthouse garden. News crews were already setting up their equipment, and early protesters began to gather with their signs. Isaiah climbed the courthouse steps, his shoes clicking against the worn marble. The weight of generations of injustice pressed down on his shoulders, but his spine remained straight. In his hands, he held the truth that could not only save his children but expose decades of corruption. The heavy wooden doors creaked open before him. Inside, the courthouse was beginning to stir with early morning activity. Clerks hurried through the halls with stacks of papers, and security guards took their positions. The final hearing would begin soon, and Isaiah knew that everything, his children's lives, the future of justice in Pine Bluff, the power of the Concordia order, hung in the balance. The courthouse buzzed with tension as the clock neared 8:50 a.m. Outside, the crowd's chants echoed through the thick walls. "Show the tape! Show the tape!" The rhythmic sound reverberated through the marble corridors, growing louder with each passing minute. Inside the courtroom, Judge Kenrick shuffled his papers, preparing to bring the hearing to a close. His face showed the strain of the past few days, the weight of what they'd uncovered pressing heavily on his shoulders. Beside him, Judge Mallory sat straight-backed and alert, her dark eyes scanning the room with careful attention. Judge Harlan occupied his seat at the bench, his usual composure showing subtle cracks. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. His fingers drummed an irregular pattern on the wooden surface before him, betraying his nervousness. Isaiah stood at the podium, his presence commanding attention. He removed the flash drive from his pocket with steady hands and addressed the court. "Your Honors, I have new evidence that must be presented before this hearing concludes." Judge Kenrick's hand paused mid-reach for his gavel. "Mr. Grant, we were preparing to close these proceedings. This evidence will prove beyond any doubt that my children are innocent," Isaiah said, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "And it will reveal who actually committed this crime." Judge Mallory leaned forward. "Proceed, Mr. Grant." The courtroom technician connected the flash drive to the large display screen. The enhanced footage began to play, crystal clear in its damning detail. The figure running past the gas station moved with unmistakable characteristics. The pronounced limp, the left-handed movements, and most importantly, the butterfly tattoo clearly visible on their neck when they turned to look over their shoulder. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Harlan's face drained of color. "This footage shows the actual perpetrator," Isaiah continued, his voice steady, and I have additional evidence that will confirm their identity." He produced a stack of sealed documents, approaching the bench with measured steps. "These are juvenile records from Los Angeles County, sealed under judicial privilege. They detail multiple break-ins and theft charges against Delilah Harlan, Judge Harlan's daughter. Each case was expunged through his intervention, using a system of judicial aliases to hide her identity." Judge Harlan's hands gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white. "I object. These are private family matters." "They became matters of public interest," Judge Mallory cut in sharply, "when an innocent person was murdered and 2 children were sentenced to death." She turned to the bailiff. "I want an immediate arrest warrant issued for Delilah Harlan." The courtroom erupted in movement. Officers rushed toward the doors, radio calls crackling with urgent instructions. Judge Harlan rose from his seat, his face flushed red with a mixture of rage and fear. "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "this requires discretion. My daughter, she needs help, not prison. We can handle this privately." "The time for private handling is long past," Judge Mallory declared, her tone brooking no argument. Minutes ticked by in tense silence as they waited for news. The radio crackled to life. Officers had found Delilah attempting to flee in a stolen vehicle. They pursued her to a gas station just outside town limits where they managed to block her escape. The arresting officer's voice came through clearly. "Suspect in custody." "She's talking, sir." First words were, "I didn't mean for him to die." Judge Harlan swayed on his feet at these words. His face turned ashen, and he clutched his chest, stumbling backward. The bailiff caught him before he hit the ground. "Call emergency services!" someone shouted. The courtroom dissolved into chaos as EMTs rushed in with a stretcher. They worked quickly, attaching monitors and starting an IV while checking his vitals. Even as they stabilized him, 2 officers approached with handcuffs. "Judge Quentin Harlan, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud." They secured the cuffs around his wrists as he lay on the stretcher, his eyes closed but breathing steady. Meanwhile, across town at the state prison, the execution team stood ready in their sterile chamber. Naomi and Normani sat strapped to their chairs, hearts pounding as the final preparations were made. The head technician reached for the switch, his hand hovering over the controls. Suddenly, the door burst open. A guard rushed in, holding his radio up like a lifeline. "Cancel everything," he shouted, breathing hard from his run. "Orders reversed. Stop the execution." The team froze, looking at each other in confusion before springing into action. They quickly began removing the restraints and electrodes from the twins, their movements urgent but gentle. Naomi and Normani sat in stunned silence as they were helped to their feet. Their legs shook as they were led through the corridors, still in chains but moving away from death row. The heavy prison doors opened, flooding the hallway with intense morning sunlight. They squinted against the brightness, barely able to process their sudden reprieve. After weeks in the dimness of death row, the world seemed almost too vivid, too real. The sounds of the crowd outside reached them, cheers and cries of joy mixing with the morning birds' songs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Naomi and Normani shuffled down the prison release corridor, their chains clinking against the polished floor. Their prison-issued clothes hung loose on their frames, evidence of weeks of barely touched meals and sleepless nights. The stark whiteness of the walls seemed to pulse with each step, their eyes still adjusting after the darkness of death row. Guards lined the corridor, their expressions a mix of shame, respect, and deliberate indifference. Some nodded as the twins passed, a silent acknowledgement of the system's failure. Others kept their eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet the gaze of 2 teenagers they'd nearly helped execute. Officer Martinez, a guard who'd shown them small kindnesses during their imprisonment, walked beside them. "Almost there," she said softly, her keys jangling as she approached the final security door. "Your father's waiting." The mention of Isaiah made Naomi's shoulders tense. Normani's breath hitched, his hands trembling slightly in their restraints. The heavy door buzzed, then swung open with a metallic groan. There he stood, Isaiah Grant, their father. His usual pristine suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick with years of absence and unspoken words. Martinez quickly removed their shackles, the metal clattering to the floor. As soon as his hands were free, Normani stumbled forward, his composure finally breaking. Isaiah caught him, wrapping his arms around his son as Normani's body shook with silent sobs. "I've got you," Isaiah whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you both now." Naomi remained rooted in place, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She watched her father hold her brother, her face a careful mask hiding the storm of emotions underneath. The muscle in her jaw twitched, the only visible sign of her internal struggle. Isaiah extended one arm toward her, his eyes pleading. "Naomi!" She took a small step back, shaking her head slightly. "We need to go," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "There are cameras waiting." Outside the prison gates, the morning sun illuminated a sea of faces. Protesters who'd maintained vigil through the night erupted in cheers as the twins emerged. Signs waved above the crowd. Justice for the Grants, Black Lives Matter, end the death penalty. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out like weapons. Camera flashes burst in rapid succession, momentarily blinding after the dim prison interior. Normani pressed closer to Isaiah, while Naomi squared her shoulders, facing the chaos with rigid determination. "No more names, no more names!" The chant started somewhere in the back of the crowd, quickly spreading until hundreds of voices joined in unified protest. Some demonstrators openly wept, reaching out to touch the twins as if to confirm they were really alive. Isaiah stepped forward to the hastily assembled microphones, keeping one arm around Normani. His voice carried across the suddenly hushed crowd. "We were almost too late, but the system has no clock, just a conscience. Today it woke up." The simple statement hit like a thunderclap, drawing fresh cheers from the assembled masses. They were quickly ushered into a waiting SUV with tinted windows. The drive to the safe house passed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they left Pine Bluff behind. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall pines that filtered the afternoon light. Inside, the twins moved through the space like ghosts. They showered mechanically, washing away the physical remnants of prison, but unable to cleanse the psychological stains. Isaiah ordered food, simple comfort dishes that reminded them of home, but most of it went untouched. Normani sat on the edge of his bed, flinching at every car that passed on the distant road, every creak of the cabin's old wood. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. When Isaiah tried to help him into bed, Normani grabbed his father's sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't leave," he whispered, sounding young and lost. "Please don't leave again." Isaiah sat beside him, running a gentle hand over his son's back until Normani finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. In the next room, Naomi lay rigid on her bed, staring at the ceiling with unblinking eyes. She didn't respond when Isaiah checked on her, didn't acknowledge his quiet, "good night." The hours crept by. While Normani's sleep was interrupted by frequent starts and whimpers, Naomi didn't close her eyes once. She watched shadows move across the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of their ordeal in vivid detail. As dawn approached, she silently got up and slipped out of the cabin. Isaiah, dozing in a chair between their rooms, stirred but didn't wake. She walked the familiar streets of their neighborhood, her feet carrying her automatically to the community center. The morning light was just beginning to touch her mother's mural, making the colors seem to glow from within. The painted face smiled down at her, strong, serene, eternal. Naomi reached up, her fingers tracing the familiar curves and lines she'd memorized over years of visits. "You kept us alive," she whispered to the image of her mother, her voice barely audible. The words carried the weight of both accusation and gratitude, for the strength she'd inherited, for the justice that had finally been served, for the chance to stand here in the growing light of a new day. The New York Times headline blazed across screens and newsstands nationwide. "Twins freed, judge's daughter charged in shocking twist." Below it, a split image showed Delilah Harlan's mugshot next to the viral courthouse footage of her father's collapse. The story spread like wildfire across social media platforms, with hashtags #Concordia Truth, Naomi and Normani, and Sovereign Silence trending simultaneously. Cable news channels ran the courtroom footage on endless loop. Isaiah's presentation of evidence, Judge Harlan's breakdown, the dramatic revelation of Delilah's involvement. Political pundits and legal analysts dissected every moment, every facial expression, every procedural detail. "This isn't just about two wrongfully convicted teenagers," said a prominent civil rights attorney on CNN. "This exposes a centuries-old system of judicial corruption that's been operating in plain sight." Protests swelled in cities across America. In Atlanta, thousands gathered outside the state Supreme Court building, demanding audits of death row cases. Chicago's criminal courthouse steps were covered in butterflies, a symbol now associated with the twins' near execution. Outside the Department of Justice in Washington, demonstrators held up enlarged photos of other suspected Concordia-linked convictions. Law students at Howard University formed a research collective, digging through archives and digitized records for patterns matching the Concordia order's methods. Their findings began appearing in detailed Twitter threads and TikTok videos reaching millions. "Look at these signature suppressions," one viral post explained, showing courthouse documents from various decades. Same language, same procedural blocks, same results. Predominantly black defendants, expedited trials, maximum sentences. Naomi sat in a softly lit studio, facing acclaimed filmmaker Ava DuVernay. Cameras rolled as she recounted their ordeal with remarkable composure. Her voice remained steady even as she described the moment they were told to prepare for execution. "They wanted us to write final statements," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I knew we weren't going to die there. Not like that. Not for their lies." DuVernay leaned forward. "How did you maintain that certainty?" "Our mother," Naomi replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She taught us that justice might be slow, might be hard, but it's unstoppable when truth is on your side." Meanwhile, Normani focused on healing. He attended daily sessions with Dr. Patricia Wells, a trauma specialist who worked specifically with survivors of wrongful imprisonment. In her peaceful office, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, he gradually began to process the experience. "I still can't sleep through the night," he admitted during one session. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that cell, counting down minutes." "That's a normal response to severe trauma," Dr. Wells assured him. "We'll work through this together, at your pace." Isaiah faced his own reckoning before a congressional ethics panel. The hearing room was packed as he took his seat, cameras tracking his every movement. The questioning was brutal and direct. "Mr. Grant," Congressman Morris began, "please explain your decision to seal the investigation report regarding your wife's death 5 years ago." Isaiah's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The moment of truth had arrived. "I made a devil's trade," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "My silence for a seat, and it cost me my family." The room erupted in murmurs. Photographers' cameras clicked rapidly, capturing his expression of raw pain and shame. "Would you make the same choice today?" Morris pressed. "No," Isaiah answered firmly, "because now I understand. Silence doesn't buy safety. It only feeds the monster." Across the country, Concordia members scrambled to cover their tracks. In private offices and secure rooms, documents were shredded, hard drives wiped, and phones destroyed. But they couldn't move fast enough to stop the flood of information. A list appeared online, 47 cases bearing the hallmarks of Concordia interference. Each entry included court documents, trial transcripts, and allegations of judicial misconduct. The list spread rapidly across social media platforms, with amateur investigators adding new details hourly. Naomi reviewed the cases from her temporary apartment in Washington, D.C. Her walls were covered with photos and timelines, connecting patterns across decades of systematic injustice. When reporters asked about her plans, her response was unwavering. "We clear them. All of them," she declared, her voice carrying the same strength that had sustained her through her own ordeal. Every single person wrongfully convicted by this corrupt system deserves justice. Legal teams began assembling nationwide, volunteering to review the cases. Law schools established clinics dedicated to investigating Concordia-linked convictions. Civil rights organizations launched funding campaigns for appeals. The remaining Concordia members gathered in their traditional meeting space, a wood-paneled room now feeling more like a tomb than a seat of power. The grand portraits on the walls seemed to mock their descendants' failures. Empty chairs marked the spaces of those who'd already fled or been arrested. In the dimness, one senior member addressed the diminished group. His whispered words carried both threat and promise. "It's time for Phase 2. We don't die. We adapt." The others nodded grimly, their faces half hidden in shadow as they contemplated their next move in this changing landscape. In the grand hall of the National Archives, morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Isaiah Grant stood at a polished wooden podium, his gray suit crisp and formal, though his shoulders carried a visible weight. Behind him, a distinguished assembly of officials, lawyers, and journalists filled the room with hushed anticipation. In his trembling hands, he held a manila envelope that had haunted him for 5 years, the sealed report of his wife's death. The envelope's official seal gleamed under the chandelier lights. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Isaiah broke the seal, the sound echoing through the hushed chamber. His fingers moved deliberately, almost reverently as he withdrew the documents. "What I'm about to read," he began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "should have been public record 5 years ago. My silence then was a betrayal, of justice, of truth, and of the woman I loved." He adjusted his reading glasses and began to read. The report's clinical language couldn't mask its devastating content. At approximately 9:47 p.m. on April 15th, Officer Cal Denton encountered Rochelle Grant outside the Pine Bluff Community Center. Mrs. Grant was observed in a kneeling position, retrieving dropped papers from a voter registration drive. Isaiah paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Officer Denton approached with weapon drawn, despite no visible threat. Mrs. Grant remained kneeling, hands visible, when Officer Denton's weapon discharged. The bullet entered through her upper back, causing immediate fatal injury. The room remained deathly quiet as Isaiah continued reading. The report detailed how the shooting was quickly labeled an accidental discharge through an internal review process. Evidence of coordination between Pine Bluff authorities and federal intermediaries emerged in email exchanges and modified reports, each carefully designed to bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucratic procedure. "The final determination," Isaiah read, his voice now thick with emotion, "cites unfortunate circumstances and departmental protocol compliance as mitigating factors in Officer Denton's favor. No charges were recommended." As the last words echoed through the chamber, a wave of murmurs swept through the assembled crowd. Journalists immediately began broadcasting live updates, their voices hushed but urgent as they reported this shocking revelation to the nation. The public reaction was swift and powerful. Within hours, Rochelle Grant's story dominated news cycles and social media. Her image, a beautiful Black woman known for her community work and dedication to voter rights, became a powerful symbol of what activists called the quietly erased. These were the victims whose stories had been buried under paperwork, their deaths hidden behind official stamps and sealed envelopes. That evening, cities across America held candlelight vigils. In Atlanta, thousands gathered at the Civil Rights Memorial, holding pictures of Rochelle. In Chicago, protesters laid voters' registration forms at the federal courthouse steps. In Los Angeles, artists painted a massive mural of her face with the words, "Silence kills truth," beneath it. Back in Washington, Isaiah sat in his office at the Department of Justice, drafting his resignation letter. His words were interrupted by a knock at the door. The president's chief of staff entered, carrying a message. The president wanted Isaiah to remain in his position. "The president believes," the chief of staff explained, "that your unique position and experience make you the ideal person to lead a new DOJ task force. We need someone who understands Concordia's methods from the inside, someone who can help dismantle this system properly." Meanwhile, Naomi had transformed her apartment into a makeshift legal command center. Laptops and documents covered every surface as she coordinated with lawyers across the country, reviewing cases that bore Concordia's fingerprints. Her legal training and first-hand experience with their tactics made her an invaluable resource for other families seeking justice. "Look for the pattern," she explained to a group of volunteer law students via video conference. Expedited trials, missing evidence, witnesses who suddenly change their stories. These are Concordia's signatures. Normani worked quietly in the background, his trauma manifesting in meticulous attention to detail. He developed a digital system for cataloging cases, cross-referencing timestamps and court documents with obsessive precision. Each file he processed was a small victory against his own demons, a way of ensuring no other family would endure what they had. During his therapy sessions, Normani began opening up about the connection between his current work and his healing process. "Every time I verify a timestamp or find a discrepancy," he told Dr. Wells, "it feels like I'm fighting back. Not just against them, but against the fear they put in me." As the sun set that evening, Isaiah made his way to Rock Creek Cemetery. Rochelle's grave, well-tended but simple, stood beneath an old oak tree. In his hands, he carried a carefully folded American flag, the same one that had hung in his DOJ office throughout his years of silence. The cemetery was quiet except for distant traffic and birdsong. Isaiah knelt before the headstone, gently placing the folded flag against the granite surface. His fingers traced the engraved letters of her name. "You were my truth," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the gathering dusk. "And I finally spoke it." The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Bluff's industrial district as FBI vehicles surrounded a nondescript warehouse. The building's faded exterior and Anderson Storage Solutions sign had fooled locals for decades, but today its true purpose would be exposed. Special Agent Marcus Chen gave the signal. "Execute warrant," he commanded into his radio. Teams of agents wearing tactical gear and carrying battering rams approached from multiple angles. The front door's reinforced steel didn't stand a chance against their coordinated assault. Inside, agents found what appeared to be a typical storage facility until they reached the back wall. Behind a false panel lay a state-of-the-art security door with multiple electronic locks. The FBI's tech team made quick work of the security system, revealing a climate-controlled archive that stretched the length of the building. "My God," Agent Chen whispered as the lights flickered on. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of labeled boxes, each containing carefully preserved documents. The air smelled of old paper and secrets. Teams of evidence technicians moved methodically through the facility. They discovered leather-bound ledgers dating back to the 1950s, containing detailed financial transactions between Concordia members and various political campaigns. Computer servers hummed in a corner room, storing decades of encrypted communications between judges, politicians, and business leaders. "Sir," called out a young agent holding up a thick folder, "I found Judge Harlan's personal records. There's a list of every case he manipulated, including notes on how he selected targets." The evidence was damning. By mid-afternoon, news helicopters circled overhead as agents loaded box after box into secure transport vehicles. Local residents gathered at the police barrier, many filming with their phones as decades of Concordia's hidden infrastructure was exposed to daylight. 2 days later, Judge Quentin Harlan sat stone-faced in a federal courtroom as the indictments were read. The charges were extensive: obstruction of justice, judicial conspiracy, and multiple counts of perjury. His perfectly pressed suit and rigid posture couldn't mask the defeat in his eyes. In a separate courtroom, Delilah Harlan appeared for her plea hearing. Gone was her designer clothing, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her voice trembled as she admitted to armed robbery and involuntary manslaughter, but when asked about other Concordia-protected crimes, something in her broke. "I wasn't the only one," she said, her words tumbling out. "Judge Richardson in Mobile, Judge Whitaker in Charleston, Judge Collins in Savannah." She named 5 judges who had helped cover up her previous crimes, providing dates and details that matched perfectly with seized records. The dominoes began to fall. Former Concordia members, sensing the inevitable, started coming forward. A retired clerk revealed their complex ranking system, where members advanced through degrees based on their effectiveness in maintaining what they called racial equilibrium in the justice system. A former initiation master detailed their secret ceremonies, performed in antebellum mansions with members wearing Civil War-era judicial robes. He provided videos of politicians and business leaders taking blood oaths to uphold Concordia's mission of preserving traditional order. In Geneva, Switzerland, Naomi Grant stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Grand Chamber fell silent as she began her testimony. "I was 18 when they tried to execute me and my brother," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not because we were guilty, but because we were black in a town where justice had been corrupted for generations." She detailed how Concordia had weaponized the legal system, using seemingly neutral procedures to target minorities. Her presentation included statistics, court records, and testimony from other victims. The evidence painted a picture of systematic racism hidden behind a veneer of legal procedure. "What happened to us wasn't an isolated incident," Naomi continued. "It was the product of a system designed to maintain racial hierarchy through selective prosecution and judicial manipulation. We demand an international investigation into racial bias in American courts because domestic oversight has failed." Representatives from dozens of nations nodded in agreement. By the end of her speech, 3 countries had already pledged support for a UN-led review of American judicial practices. Back in Pine Bluff, Detective Lana Cross sat in her office, staring at a letter from the FBI offering her a senior position in their Civil Rights Division. The promotion would mean more money, more resources, and a chance to fight corruption at the federal level. But Lana had other plans. Using her savings and support from civil rights organizations, she established Wren's Law, a civilian oversight group dedicated to monitoring judicial conduct and investigating claims of racial bias in sentencing. Judge Silas Wren died trying to expose judicial corruption in 1837, Lana explained to her first team of investigators. "We're going to continue his fight, but this time with modern tools and public accountability." The organization set up shop in a renovated church near the courthouse. Local volunteers, many of them family members of Concordia's victims, staffed phones and helped people navigate the legal system. Law students from across the country applied for internships, eager to learn investigative techniques from the woman who helped expose Concordia. 1 month after the raid, Naomi stood in Wren's Law's main office looking at a wall that told a story of both tragedy and triumph. Hundreds of photographs covered the surface, men and women wrongly convicted under Concordia's influence. Each face represented years of stolen life, families torn apart, communities damaged. Many of the photos now had green check marks beside them, indicating successful exoneration. Some showed people reuniting with their families, while others captured former inmates graduating from college or starting businesses. With careful movements, Naomi took out 2 familiar mugshots, her own and Normani's. Their young faces showed fear and confusion, unaware they were caught in a centuries-old system of oppression. She placed these photos at the center of the wall, a reminder of where this fight began. Looking at the wall of faces, some still waiting for justice, Naomi's expression hardened with determination. "We're not done yet," she declared, her voice carrying through the busy office. 6 months later, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division hummed with renewed purpose. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of the modern conference room, illuminating Isaiah Grant as he stood before his assembled team. The room was filled with fresh faces, eager young civil rights attorneys, trauma specialists, and justice reform advocates who had been carefully selected for their dedication to systemic change. Their eyes shone with determination, notebooks open and ready to continue the work that had already changed so many lives. Isaiah's silver-streaked hair and tired eyes betrayed the weight of his journey, but his voice carried steady authority as he addressed the National Commission on Judicial Reform. Maps and data visualizations covered the walls, tracking their progress across multiple states. Red pins marked locations of overturned convictions, while blue ones indicated ongoing investigations. Yellow flags highlighted communities where grassroots education efforts had taken root. 62 lives restored, Isaiah announced, tapping the latest statistics on the screen behind him. 62 families reunited, but there are hundreds more cases to review. He gestured to a stack of files, each representing a potential wrongful conviction tied to Concordia's influence. His fingers lingered momentarily on the topmost folder, a silent acknowledgement of the person whose life waited inside those pages. The young attorneys nodded earnestly, many taking notes on laptops or tablets. They represented a new generation of legal minds, determined to rebuild the justice system with equity at its core. Among them sat former clerks who had helped expose judicial misconduct, public defenders who had fought impossible odds, and researchers who had traced Concordia's complex web of influence. Some had sacrificed lucrative careers at prestigious firms to join this fight, driven by a vision of justice that transcended paychecks. Back in Pine Bluff, transformation was visible in both big and small ways. The courthouse that had once been a symbol of oppression now stood as a testament to change. Workers had carefully mounted a bronze plaque near the entrance, its words serving as both warning and promise. Here justice slept. May it never again. Local residents often paused to read the inscription, some placing their hands on the cool metal as if drawing strength from its commitment. Inside the local high school auditorium, Naomi Grant commanded attention as she spoke to a packed room of students. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had faced the system's darkest side and emerged stronger. The scars of her experience were invisible but present in the intensity of her gaze and the deliberate power of her words. They counted on our silence, she told the captivated teenagers. They counted on fear keeping us quiet. But true justice requires voices, your voices. She shared practical advice about knowing their rights, documenting interactions with authorities, and building community support networks. When her voice cracked with emotion, she didn't hide it, letting the students see both her vulnerability and her resolve. The students leaned forward in their seats, many recording her words on their phones. These weren't abstract concepts to them. They had watched the Grant twins' story unfold in their own community. Now they were learning how to prevent history from repeating itself. Several hands shot up during the question period, eager for guidance on how they could make a difference in their own neighborhoods. Across town, Normani worked in quieter ways. The community center where he and Naomi had once volunteered became his base of operations for helping formerly incarcerated youth rebuild their lives. He avoided cameras and speeches, preferring to work one-on-one with teenagers struggling to find their footing after release. His gentle smile and steady presence created a safe harbor for those whose trust had been repeatedly broken. In the center's small office, Normani sat with a young man recently freed after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. The hardest part isn't getting out, Normani explained softly, understanding in his eyes. It's learning how to live again. He helped with practical matters, job applications, housing forms, counseling referrals, while providing the equally crucial gift of patient listening. The walls of his office were covered with photographs of success stories, former clients at graduation ceremonies, starting new jobs, reuniting with families. The news of Esther Whitlow's arrest sent shockwaves through the nation's elite circles. Federal agents led her from her mansion in handcuffs, her perfectly maintained appearance contrasting sharply with the reality of her RICO indictment. The investigation had revealed how she had used her charitable foundation to funnel millions in Concordia funds through a complex network of shell companies. Her neighbors watched from behind curtained windows as the woman who had hosted lavish fundraisers was escorted into an unmarked government vehicle. Her booking photo became instantly iconic, the composed socialite mask finally cracking to reveal fury and fear underneath. Cable news channels ran split-screen comparisons between her previous public appearances as a philanthropist and the evidence of her decades-long role in supporting systematic racism through the legal system. Former associates rushed to distance themselves, while investigative journalists uncovered more connections between Esther's charitable work and judicial corruption across the country. One evening, in a quiet moment at Isaiah's temporary DC apartment, Naomi finally addressed the pain that had lingered between them for years. She found him reviewing case files at his kitchen table, reading glasses perched on his nose. The lamplight cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the new lines that had formed there. "We're only here because you stopped running," she said, her voice carrying years of hurt. "But you did run. Isaiah set down his papers slowly. He didn't turn to face her immediately, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with acceptance. I know. I live with it. His shoulders seemed to carry the invisible burden of all his choices, good and bad. The simple admission hung between them, not an excuse or a plea for forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of truth. The silence that followed felt less sharp than those that had come before. Something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. In his DOJ office, Isaiah began the process of stepping away from public service. He carefully packed away certificates and awards, official photographs, and legal texts. The walls slowly emptied until only one frame remained, a photograph capturing a moment of pure joy before everything changed. In it, Naomi and Normani flanked their mother Rochelle in their old kitchen, all three laughing at some forgotten joke, sunlight streaming through the window behind them. Their smiles were unguarded, a family whole and happy before the fractures that would later define them. Isaiah gently lifted the photo from its hook, wrapped it in tissue paper, and placed it in his leather bag. He stood for a moment in the doorway, hand resting on the light switch, taking in the empty office that had been both his refuge and his penance. Without ceremony, he flicked off the lights and walked away from his public life, leaving behind the weight of power, but carrying forward the lessons of its price. As he walked through the building's marble halls one last time, junior staffers nodded respectfully, unaware they were witnessing the quiet end of one journey and the beginning of another. 1 year later, morning sunlight cast long shadows across the stark walls of the Pine Bluff Women's Correctional Facility. Naomi Grant's footsteps echoed through the sterile hallway as a guard led her toward the visiting area. Her face remained composed, betraying none of the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. The familiar scent of industrial cleaner and stale air brought back unwelcome memories she fought to push aside. The visiting room was a study in institutional bleakness, fluorescent lights humming overhead, worn plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and thick plexiglass barriers dividing visitors from inmates. Naomi took her seat with deliberate calm, placing her hands flat on the metal counter before her. She drew a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. Through the scratched barrier, Delilah Harlan appeared, escorted by a corrections officer. The judge's daughter looked markedly different from her booking photo, her designer clothes replaced by prison orange, her carefully maintained appearance stripped down to bare essentials. Her once perfect hair hung limp around her face, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She moved with nervous energy, fingers constantly moving, eyes darting around before settling on Naomi's steady gaze. A soft knock from the guard signaled the start of their allowed time. For several moments, neither woman spoke. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, heavy with unspoken history. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting down their precious minutes. "I've been going to therapy," Delilah finally said, her voice slightly muffled by the plexiglass. 3 times a week. She paused, swallowing hard. "I started drawing again, mostly butterflies." Her hand unconsciously moved to her neck where the edge of her tattoo peeked above her collar. Her fingers trembled as they traced the outline. Naomi remained silent, her expression neutral but attentive. Her stillness seemed to make Delilah more anxious, words spilling out faster, tumbling over each other in her rush to fill the void. "The therapist says art can help with processing trauma. Not that I'm saying I'm the one who..." Delilah's voice cracked. "What I mean is, can I ever be forgiven? For what I did? For what my father did?" Her eyes pleaded across the divide that separated them. Without speaking, Naomi reached into her bag and removed a single sheet of paper. With precise movements, she placed it against the plexiglass. It contained a list of names, dozens of them, each representing a young black life derailed by Judge Harlan's corrupt rulings. All now exonerated, but years lost could never be returned. Some names had small stars beside them, those who hadn't lived to see justice. "They can't ask you for forgiveness," Naomi said, her voice clear and measured. "So I came to say it for them." Each word was carefully chosen, delivered with quiet intensity that filled the small space. The words hit Delilah like physical blows. She crumpled forward, shoulders shaking with sobs. Tears ran down her face, dropping onto the metal counter below. Through it all, Naomi watched without flinching, without offering comfort. Her eyes remained dry, focused, and clear, though her knuckles whitened slightly as she pressed her hands against the counter. "This isn't about hate," Naomi continued after Delilah's sobs had quieted to hiccuping breaths. "This is about remembrance. Every name on this list was someone's child, someone's sister or brother, someone's future that your father tried to erase." She tapped the paper gently, drawing Delilah's red-rimmed eyes back to the names. Outside in the prison parking lot, Normani leaned against their car, his face turned toward the morning sun. The warmth felt good against his skin, a small comfort as he waited. When Naomi emerged from the building, he straightened up, studying her expression carefully, searching for signs of distress or resolution. "Did it help?" he asked softly as she approached, keys jingling in his hand. Naomi paused before answering, considering the weight of the question. The breeze ruffled her hair as she looked back at the imposing facility. "No," she finally replied, "but it was necessary." She squeezed her brother's arm gently before sliding into the passenger seat. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked alone through the halls of what had once been the Concordia Courthouse. The building had been transformed into a Truth and Reconciliation Museum, its stark white walls now covered with photographs, documents, and interactive displays chronicling both the darkness of the past and the ongoing fight for justice. Her footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, mingling with the hushed voices of other visitors. Her footsteps slowed as she approached a particular exhibit. Behind protective glass, two photographs hung side by side, one showing Judge Silas Wren, the abolitionist whose courage had helped save her and Normani's lives, the other showing her mother, Rochelle Grant. Both had fought the same system, generations apart. Both had paid heavy prices for their principles. Rochelle's smile, frozen in time, made Naomi's heart ache with love and loss. Naomi stood before the display, her reflection ghosting over the glass. "We were never meant to survive," she whispered to the silent photographs. "And yet, here we are." She pressed her palm against the cool surface, as if reaching across time to touch her mother's face. Behind her, scaffolding rose along one wall where artists worked on a new mural. Their brushes moved with purpose, bringing to life a powerful image: Naomi, Normani, and Rochelle emerging from dark waters, their faces determined, their hands gripping a torn scroll marked with the words, Clause 19B. The artwork seemed to pulse with life and meaning, a testament to survival and transformation. Paint fumes mingled with the scent of hope as the artists captured in vivid color what words alone could never express. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi and Normani, I handpicked this next story. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi and Normani, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.